You check your phone 96 times a day. You scroll TikTok while your dreams rot. You gossip about people who don't even know your name while your potential is starving to death. And here's the worst part. You're not lazy. No, you're worse. You're comfortable. You're a walking snooze button wrapped in the illusion of productivity. Wake up, zombie. This isn't practice. This is it. Right now, you're alive. But are you living? Paul Kalanithi was 36 at the top of his game, a neurosurgeon, a genius, a philosopher, and he still couldn't escape the brutal truth. Life doesn't wait for you to figure it out. One moment he was saving lives. The next, he was the one fighting for his own. Cancer didn't care about his resume. Mortality doesn't do interviews. So let's go deeper, not just into Paul's story, but into yours. Let's get something straight. Paul Kalanithi didn't die a doctor. He died a philosopher disguised as a surgeon. This man didn't just understand the brain, he understood what it meant to be human. He cut through skulls during the day and wrestled with existence at night. While most of us waste our lives debating whether to follow our passion or pay the bills, Paul did both and then got handed a death sentence. Stage 4 lung cancer. No warnings, no second chances. But here's where it gets real. Instead of spiraling, instead of whining about the unfairness of life, he picked up a pen and started writing. He stared death in the face and said, "You don't get to narrate this. I do." Paul wasn't just a neurosurgeon. He was an English literature major, a Stanford scholar, a Yale-trained medical prodigy, a husband, a soon-to-be father, a dying man who used his final months not to hide, not to beg, not to manifest a miracle, but to leave behind a masterpiece that reads like a scalpel to your soul. He didn't just live, he lived awake, and that's exactly what you're not doing. Now, before we go any further, a quick disclaimer. This video is protected under the Fair Use Act. It's for educational and transformative purposes only. We're not just summarizing Paul's work, we're interrogating it, challenging it, expanding it, giving it new meaning in a new context for a new audience. Because that's what real learning looks like. This isn't a review. This is a resurrection of the urgency Paul tried to leave behind. This is about you confronting your own expiration date. Paul Kalanithi didn't have time to waste, and neither do you. Scan of truth. Imagine looking at your own death certificate, and it's not printed, not signed by a doctor. It's glowing at you from a CT scan monitor. Most people would break. Most people would cry, panic, or spiral. Paul Kalanithi? He's scrolling through images of his own shredded lungs, deformed spine, and vanishing liver like he's reading the sports section. Except this isn't a paper. This is him, his body, his death. No dramatics, no denial, just this cold, hard clinical recognition. Cancer, advanced. That's when the world cracks. If you think this is just another live like you're dying story, you're not paying attention. This isn't about chasing sunsets or jumping out of planes. This is about truth. And the truth is that most of us are already dying. Not from cancer, but from denial. You walk through life like you're owed time. Paul walked through hospitals watching patients flatline. Then, one day, he was the patient. Let's back up. 6 months before that soul punch of a scan, Paul's body had started sending him warnings. Weight loss, back pain. But like every good overachiever, he brushed it off. "I'm just working too hard," he told himself. Sound familiar? You ignore the red flags because it's not convenient. You numb yourself with hustle culture and self-diagnose yourself with grind flu. You're not tired, you're being warned, but you won't listen until your body screams. And sometimes, not even then. Paul finally visits the doctor. He jokes about the textbook answer being cancer, as if he could laugh his way out of it. The arrogance of expertise, the tragedy of being right. What's wild is how fast denial can turn to doom. Paul goes from working 36 hours in the OR to being tethered to an IV, flipping through his own death sentence on a hospital computer. You can feel the silence in that room. Lucy, his wife, also a doctor, asks the question you only ask when you already know the answer. "Is there any chance it's something else?" "No," he says. And that's the moment. The rupture. You know what most of us do when we get bad news? We run. We hide. We slap on toxic positivity and tell ourselves everything happens for a reason. Bullshit. Some things happen because life doesn't care what you had planned. And Paul's whole identity, the surgeon, the scientist, the future father, collapses in an instant. All those dreams on hold indefinitely or maybe permanently. But he doesn't rage. He doesn't collapse. He goes inward, deep. Because when the outer world fails you, you have to go spelunking into your soul. This is where things get uncomfortable. Most of us don't want to know who we are without our careers, our health, our forward momentum. But Paul was built different. He doesn't avoid the pain. He walks toward it. He had already spent years standing at the edge of death, guiding patients through their final moments. Now he's standing on the other side of the curtain. He watches the familiar system, the gowns, the scans, the forms, except now he's not the one fixing the broken bodies. He is the broken body, and it's devastating. But here's what separates Paul from the rest. He doesn't collapse into the fear. He uses it. He strips his identity down to the studs and starts building again, from the inside out. While most people beg for a miracle, Paul chooses clarity. That's where the real transformation begins. He had built his life on meaning, not comfort. While others collect accolades like action figures, Paul wanted one thing: truth. And now he's forced to find it not in philosophy books or surgery, but in suffering. And here's the punch in the gut for everyone watching this who thinks they've got time. Even if I'm dying, until I actually die, I am still living. That's not a metaphor, that's a dare. What are you doing with your living? Are you waking up? Or are you existing in a coma with your eyes open? Because here's the brutal reality. Paul didn't lose time. You are. Right now. Death doesn't always come with a scan. Sometimes it comes with scrolling. Sometimes it comes with never writing that book, never fixing that relationship, never telling someone you love them until they're gone. Paul stared into the void and saw it blink. What will it take for you to look? Key takeaway. Clarity doesn't come when things are going right. It comes when your entire existence is flipped upside down. Paul's diagnosis didn't destroy him. It forced him to get honest. That's where real meaning lives, in the space where your illusions die. Favorite quote: even if I'm dying, until I actually die, I am still living. Words into scalpel. You're not here to be comfortable. You're here to wake the hell up. If you're still wasting your life waiting for things to make sense, this should bother you. Paul Kalanithi was already halfway to being the next Cormac McCarthy of medicine. The man studied philosophy at Cambridge and literature at Stanford. He was elbow deep in Milton and Whitman, while most of us are busy highlighting passive-aggressive posts on LinkedIn. He didn't need to cut open brains to feel smart. He could have been a tenured professor, sipping lattes and dissecting metaphors for a living. But no, that wasn't enough. He needed something real, something that didn't hide behind academic armor or avoid the rawness of actual pain. So he walked away from the books and went straight to the battlefield, medicine, not because he stopped loving literature, but because he realized books couldn't bleed. Real life could. Most people go into medicine because their parents told them to, or because they want money, or because their resume was too clean to say no to Harvard Med. Not Paul. He wanted to know where the soul ends and the synapse begins. He wanted to answer the kind of questions that burn at 3 a.m. when your chest is tight and your dreams feel hollow. Questions like, what makes a person a person? What does suffering mean? Why the hell does it matter that we die? So of course, he didn't choose dermatology. He chose neurosurgery, the brutal, elite, sleepless crucible where you don't just fix people. You decide who gets to walk again, who gets to talk again, who gets to keep being themselves. And he didn't dip a toe in. He went full immersion, chem, physics, squatting in abandoned dorm rooms so he could afford to study. When other people were prepping for open mic night in New York, Paul was memorizing muscle groups and pulling all-nighters with cadavers. Why? Because words had started to feel too light, too safe. Literature could give you tools to see pain, but surgery, that made you part of it. If empathy was the theory, medicine was the practice. Paul knew he couldn't live in abstraction forever. He needed to feel life pulsing under his fingers. He needed the weight. But here's what's wild. He never let go of the literature. He brought it with him. He was the scalpel in one hand, Shakespeare in the other. And that's what made him lethal. Because you can teach someone to cut. You can't teach someone to care. That's the real point here. Most of us want our careers to give us meaning. Paul flipped it. He asked, how can I bring meaning into the work? And the answer wasn't in getting more efficient or building a brand. It was in knowing his patience. It was in making sure before he sliced into a person's brain that he understood what that person valued, what made their life worth living. Not from a textbook, from them. This isn't just medical training, it's spiritual warfare. And if you're listening to this thinking, well, I'm not a doctor, so this doesn't apply to me, you missed the entire point. You're in surgery every single day. You are slicing up your time, your energy, your attention. Are you doing it with care, with meaning, or are you just cutting through the days like they're disposable? The reason Paul's story hit so hard is that he wasn't trying to be a hero. He just refused to settle for half-truths. Literature taught him how to feel. Medicine forced him to act. And somewhere in the middle, in that space between metaphor and muscle, he found the sacred. That's what most people miss. They either sit in their ivory towers theorizing about pain, or they dive into action without thinking about why it matters. Paul said screw that. He wanted the whole thing. The blood and the beauty, the soul and the science, the art and the agony. And that's why his story cuts. Because it dares you to do the same. So ask yourself, are you living a life that demands your full attention? Or are you just surviving on autopilot, hoping meaning will tap you on the shoulder someday? Spoiler, it won't. You want purpose? Then stop hiding behind comfort, pick up the scalpel, and start cutting into the truth. Key takeaway, meaning doesn't show up. You build it by doing hard, sacred work that ties your intellect to your soul. Paul's life wasn't defined by a diagnosis. It was defined by his refusal to live in fragments. He fused the brain and the spirit and dared the rest of us to catch up. Favorite quote, literature provided the richest material for moral reflection. It gave me a vocabulary to describe the pain I saw in the world. Anatomy of meaning. You think pressure is having a deadline. Paul Kalanithi's pressure was holding someone's identity in his hands with a scalpel the size of a pinky finger. One wrong move and that person doesn't just die, they vanish. You think stress is forgetting your password. Paul's stress was watching a mother sob as he explained her son's seizure would return because he had to slice out part of the boy's brain that made him him. You're not overwhelmed. You're just under-challenged. Let's stop pretending the average day is hard. Paul's average day involved deciding whether cutting 2 millimeters deeper would relieve suffering or turn a man into a breathing corpse. That's what happens when your workplace is someone's skull. In neurosurgery, there's no room for imposter syndrome. Either you know or people suffer. Paul learned fast. Faster than he wanted to. The residents around him were dropping like flies, burning out, breaking down, giving up. One never learned to admit his mistakes. Another jumped off a roof after a patient died. And that's what no one tells you. The weight of playing God eventually crushes your spine unless you learn how to carry it. And Paul did. He broke, then hardened, then softened again. Not into stone, into something sharper. He realized being technically excellent wasn't optional, it was moral. You don't get a participation trophy in brain surgery. You get a sobbing family or a silent funeral. Perfection isn't a goal, it's a minimum requirement. But let's be clear, he still failed. He watched kids die. He watched adults live in twilight states, breathing, heart beating, but no soul left. That kind of death is worse. It's prolonged dying, handed off to institutions and ignored birthdays. And Paul had to decide, do I keep someone alive when I know they'll never really live again? There's no textbook answer to that. There's just guts and guilt and guesswork. Somewhere in that crucible, Paul figured it out. Not how to be perfect, but how to aim toward it with ruthless compassion. Before you touch a brain, he said, you better understand the mind behind it, their hopes, their identity, what makes their life theirs. You don't get to treat people like anatomy puzzles. You treat the whole person, or you shouldn't be there. That's what separates real professionals from posers. The poser reads charts, the professional reads the human. And Paul, He bled for it, literally, metaphorically, emotionally. Residency didn't just train his hands, it trained his soul. He watched the toll build on his friends, watched one guy lose his marriage, another his sanity. He saw brilliance buried under bureaucracy and burnout. He buried his first patient, a vibrant 82-year-old who died overnight on his watch, and still he stayed, because he believed in the sacred call of medicine, not as a job, as a vow. But don't confuse sacred with soft. This is war, and war has casualties. Some days Paul left the OR feeling like a god, other days like a murderer. One electrode misplaced, and a man dissolves into a black hole of sadness. One shaved millimeter too far, and you create a monster. A boy who eats compulsively, hurts his mother, gets locked away forever. This is the weight of choosing to matter. Paul didn't hide from it. He walked straight into it and said, if this is what it takes to understand the value of life, then hand me the scalpel. What's your excuse? You want fulfillment? Then stop acting like a career will hand it to you wrapped in a benefits package. Fulfillment is found in the trenches, in the dark places most people avoid. It's forged through grief, through sacrifice, through choosing to care when it would be easier not to. Paul stared into every type of human unraveling and came out clearer, not colder. He understood that no career, no passion, no title will protect you from pain, but choosing a path that makes the pain worth it, that's power. He didn't want an easy life. He wanted a meaningful one, and the price was sleepless nights, impossible decisions, and carrying the unbearable, because he knew the only thing worse than failing was not showing up at all. So the next time you think your day is tough, ask yourself this: did you spend it trying to be perfect for the sake of someone else's soul? Did you even try? Or are you still waiting for life to hand you purpose without demanding pain? Key takeaway: excellence isn't a goal. It's a moral obligation when your actions shape another person's future. Paul's journey through the brutal world of neurosurgery reveals that true meaning is not found in achievement, but in serving something greater than yourself through relentless commitment, even when it breaks you. Favorite quote: before operating on a patient's brain, I realized I must first understand his mind, what makes his life worth living, and what devastation makes it reasonable to let that life end. The diagnosis mirror. So here's the thing, no one wants to admit. We all think we're the exception. You live like your life is a story you're writing from the outside, like you can edit the hard parts out later, like death is some vague ending that won't apply to you until chapter 100. But life doesn't care how clean your narrative is. One diagnosis and the plot explodes. Paul Kalanithi got that diagnosis, stage 4 lung cancer. Not maybe, not possibly, not if we're lucky. Just death, straight up, stamped onto his medical chart in bold ink. And the worst part, he understood it too well. The man had spent over a decade studying death from a clinical distance, dissecting it, solving it, preparing for it on others' behalf. Now he had to swallow it himself. That's not poetic justice. That's raw, unfiltered reality. A reality most people would crumble under. But Paul had the audacity to narrate it while it was happening. And he does it without flinching. You can practically see the moment his identity begins to implode. He's not Dr. Kalanithi anymore. He's patient number whatever, gown gaping in the back, hooked up to an IV, scrolling through his own CT scans like it's homework he forgot to turn in. He sees it, the lungs riddled with tumors, the spine wrecked, the liver mutilated. There's no looking away, and this is where it really cuts. He doesn't panic, he doesn't rage, he just knows. That quiet, god-awful, intellectual knowing that doesn't scream, it just lands like a lead weight. He tells Lucy, his wife, no, when she asks if it could be something else. Not because he's guessing, because he's certain. It's one thing to face death, it's another thing to face it knowing exactly how it ends, step by clinical step. Paul knew, and instead of retreating, he began the hardest journey of all, figuring out who the hell he was now that everything he built had cracked down the middle. There's something especially cruel about having to dismantle the dream while you're still awake inside it. Paul had built a future like a fortress, professorships, research labs, life-changing surgeries, lives saved, a daughter maybe. He had it mapped, and then death walked in like it owned the place and flipped the whole board over. But instead of quitting, he wrestled hard. He questioned everything, not in a Hallmark card, everything happens for a reason kind of way. More like, what does anything even mean if you lose the ability to be who you were? He doesn't come to easy answers. Hell, he barely comes to any answers. But that's the brilliance of it, because here's the part we try to avoid. Identity isn't static. It's not your job title or your routine or how many people clap for you. Identity is fragile. It shatters when your body does. He went from the man who operated for 36 hours straight to the man who needed help walking to the bathroom. From choosing which surgeries to perform to needing a cane and a modified toilet seat. From a man at the top of his field to someone who didn't know if he could ever hold a scalpel again. And through it all, he kept asking the question we're all terrified to ask. If I'm not who I used to be, who am I now? That's what this part of the book demands from you. Not sympathy, not awe, reflection, because you're one bad phone call away from the same reckoning. Your version might not be cancer, it might be loss, heartbreak, injury, mental collapse, but it's coming. And if you've built your identity on externals, it will cave like cheap drywall. Paul's greatest surgery wasn't in the operating room. It was on himself, taking apart who he thought he was and reconstructing something new from the ashes. And he doesn't do it with denial or delusion. He does it with honesty. He says it plainly, I don't want to die. He doesn't pretend he's fine. He grieves for himself. And that unflinching vulnerability is what makes him more alive than most people ever get. He didn't beat cancer. He didn't manifest healing through affirmations. He stood in the middle of the wreckage and tried to make sense of it. He tried to live with it, and that in itself is a radical act. So ask yourself, are you really living or just playing dress up in your old identity because it's easier than admitting it doesn't fit anymore? Death doesn't wait for you to get your shit together. Neither should you. Key takeaway. You are not your career, your strength, your plan, or your past. You are what's left after all of that gets stripped away. Real meaning comes not from what you build, but from who you choose to become when it all burns down. Favorite quote, severe illness wasn't life-altering, it was life-shattering. It felt less like an epiphany and more like someone had just firebombed the path forward. Choosing parenthood at the cliff edge. Let's be honest. Most people can't even commit to a gym membership because what if I move in 6 months? Meanwhile, Paul Kalanithi, a man actively dying, a man staring down the cold clinical reality of stage 4 cancer, chose to become a father. You want to talk about courage? That's courage. You want to talk about faith? That's faith. And you want to talk about building something that outlives you? That's what legacy actually looks like. Let's rewind. Paul and Lucy could have easily played it safe. No one would have judged them. He's terminal. His body's in revolt. They're tracking every fleeting symptom with spreadsheets and scans. Yet, in the thick of all of that, when most people are trimming their emotional investments down to the essentials, they doubled down. They added weight to their already collapsing world. Because love doesn't always play by logic. It plays by meaning. And meaning doesn't ask for safety. It demands sacrifice. Paul doesn't romanticize it. He knows damn well what's coming. He understands that Lucy might end up raising their child alone, grieving 2 lives at once. He wrestles with the guilt, with the fear, with the image of Lucy walking alone through life, child in arms, memory in heart, and still he chooses. But he doesn't do it blindly. He questions, will this make my death harder? Will it rob Lucy of our last precious moments together? Will holding my child make it hurt more when I leave? Yes. And still, wouldn't it be great if it did? Because the point was never to avoid pain. The point was to invest in life even if it breaks your heart, especially if it breaks your heart. That's what most people miss. We've bought into this shallow modern myth that if something causes pain, it's probably a mistake. But Paul turns that idea inside out. Pain, in the right context, is a sign you're doing something real, something human, something worthwhile. He and Lucy move forward with IVF, and it's not this clinical checkbox kind of decision. It's soul-rending. because creating life in the shadow of death is messy, it's beautiful, and it's loaded with grief even before it begins. They're not trying to immortalize Paul in some sentimental way. They're simply choosing to affirm life in its most vulnerable, brutal form. They're planting something in the soil even as the storm tears up the sky. The doctor they meet for fertility treatment? Clueless. Completely unequipped for patients staring down death instead of infertility. She talks fast, eyes glued to her clipboard, asking, "How long have you been trying?" As if they have time to try. Paul doesn't even flinch. He just presses forward. He worries about creating too many embryos, about leaving Lucy with pieces of him frozen in a lab after he's gone, half lives in test tubes. Not poetic, just tragic. The detail doesn't escape him, and neither should it escape you. This whole section is a confrontation with mortality, not through medicine, but through intention. It's a reminder that the only real way to push back against death is not to deny it. It's to build something anyway, to lean in anyway, to become more human, not less, because time is short. You don't need to be dying to learn this. You're already on a clock. The question is whether you're using your time to hoard safety or build legacy. Are you making decisions that you'll be proud of on your deathbed, or are you just trying to avoid discomfort? Paul knew the answers didn't lie in spreadsheets or statistics. They lay in values. That's what his therapist kept reminding him. Stop calculating, start valuing. Ask what matters, not what lasts. So they had a child, and her name was Katie. And even as Paul's strength faded, he read to her. He held her, he whispered to her, he lived in those moments with a depth that most people don't reach in a lifetime. Because when everything else is stripped away, all that's left is presence. And guess what? It was worth it. Not because it ended in a miracle cure, but because it began in love. And that's what you need to understand. Meaning isn't about controlling the outcome. It's about choosing the input, showing up, loving hard, living loud, and leaving something behind that isn't made of fear. If you're not willing to hurt for what you love, you don't love it enough. Key takeaway: real meaning doesn't come from control, safety, or convenience. It comes from choosing love, even in the face of devastation, from affirming life not when it's easy, but when it's almost impossible. Favorite quote: "Don't you think saying goodbye to your child will make your death more painful? Wouldn't it be great if it did?" Return to the table, then goodbye. Most people don't understand what it means to walk back into a room knowing it's going to break you, to choose the pain, to stare death in the face and say, "Not yet, I've got something to finish." But Paul Kalanithi wasn't most people. He was a surgeon with his spine lined with tumors, lungs that barely obeyed his orders, and a brain likely already touched by cancer. And still, he came back. Because for Paul, operating wasn't a task, it was identity. And you don't just let go of who you are because you're sick. You fight to carry it one last mile. Let's get this straight. Most people would have quit. Doctors told him not to bother. Friends told him to spend more time with family. Society would have handed him a retirement cake and wheeled him off with applause. But Paul? He wasn't here for applause. He was here for meaning. And for him, meaning was a table, a drill, and a patient whose life depended on what his hands could still do. The first time he goes back into the OR after months of chemo and physical deterioration, it's like watching a man try to run into a burning building he once designed. Every part of his body screams, "No," but something deeper says, "Just one more." That's the war zone he willingly re-enters. He rewires his physical therapy routine, not to get better for the beach, not for a marathon, for the standing, grueling, high-pressure performance of neurosurgery. Long hours, micro motions, pronation for placing pedicle screws. This wasn't self-care, this was soul resuscitation. And the moment comes, he operates, and he's good. Still sharp, still fast, still Paul. But something's different. The work doesn't feel the same anymore, not because he's weaker, but because he's aware. Aware that the time he spends inside someone else's brain is time stolen from his daughter, from Lucy, from the soft real life he now knows he's leaving behind. And then it all starts to crack. His lungs begin to betray him. The cancer, which once shrank with Tarsava, begins to resist treatment. His appetite vanishes. His words slur. The scan confirms what he already knows in his bones. It's over. The tumors have reached his brain. There's a term for it, leptomeningeal carcinomatosis. Translation? There's no fixing this. So here's the thing that will haunt you. He knows what happens next. He doesn't just fear it, he's witnessed it in others. As a neurosurgeon, he knows exactly what this kind of metastasis does to cognition, to presence, to dignity. He's held the hands of people in that spiral. Now it's his. And the scalpel? It has to go. Paul steps away from the table, not because he's lost his edge, but because he understands that his presence now belongs elsewhere. In his writing, in his family, in the seconds of clarity he still has left. That decision, that's real strength. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people cling to their professions like lifeboats until they become anchors. Paul lets go before it drags him down. That's not surrender. That's honor. And it hurts. Every paragraph in this section of his book aches, because leaving behind what you love, especially when you can still almost do it, is worse than never having had it at all. But Paul doesn't vanish. He writes. And those final days are a testament to what it looks like when someone channels every last ounce of strength, not into pretending they're fine, but into giving something back. He isn't fighting death anymore. He's wrestling with time, trying to pin just a few more words to the page before it all goes dark. He never finishes the book. Lucy tells us that, because that's the point. You don't get to finish. You get to give what you can with the time you have, and if you're lucky, it's enough. Stop pretending you'll have time later. Paul didn't. You won't. Stop delaying what matters. Make the damn leap. Write the thing. Call your people. Show up for your own life. Paul walked away from the one place that defined him, not because he was defeated, but because he finally knew what it meant to live beyond the table. Key takeaway. Knowing when to fight is hard. Knowing when to let go is harder. But the real mark of wisdom is being able to do both with dignity. Knowing your value isn't in what you do, but in what you are willing to face. Favorite quote, even if I'm dying until I actually die, I am still living. Letters to the living. If you want to see a man do battle while already halfway in the grave, here it is. If you've ever told yourself, I'll write that book later, or when things calm down, I'll focus on what matters, then this is your wake-up call, because Paul was literally dying, lungs failing, cancer eating his spine, brain tumors throwing shadows across his cognition. And what did he do? He wrote, not in an artsy sipping tea by a fireplace way, but hunched in a recliner with chemo dripping into his veins and his fingers cracked from drug-induced fissures. He wore silver-lined gloves just so he could touch the keyboard. That's how desperate he was to leave something behind. A voice, a meaning, a message. And let's be honest, you probably wasted more time today scrolling through people's food pics than he had left to live. What the hell are you doing with your life? Paul didn't write because it was therapeutic. He didn't write for fame. He didn't even write because he had something cute to say. He wrote because he was burning alive inside a clock. And the only way to stay human, to stay himself, was to grab that burning time and do something with it. He said it best himself. He didn't want to give people flowery false hope or lean into the melodrama of dying. He wanted you to walk in his shoes, feel what it feels like to be on the other side of a terminal diagnosis, and still choose to be present, to love, to fight for your identity, not just your pulse. And yes, his story is tragic, but don't you dare reduce him to a tragedy. He's a scalpel-sharp philosopher with a deadline, and his words, they're scalpels too, cutting through your distractions, your excuses, your laziness, your privilege to breathe without pain, and asking, what will you leave behind? He didn't know if his daughter would remember him, so he etched a message in ink deeper than genetics ever could. He built a fatherhood in words. He didn't have time to make polished essays, so he spilled truth, unfiltered, elegant and raw. And what came out was writing so rich, so painfully honest, it could hold its own next to the meditations of Marcus Aurelius or the reflections of Viktor Frankl. He knew what death does, but more importantly, he knew what it doesn't have to do. It doesn't have to erase. It doesn't have to silence. You can talk back to death. That's what writing is. That's what this book is. His editor knew he wouldn't finish it. Paul knew he wouldn't finish it. But that's not the point. The point is that He tried. The point is that he started even when he had no guarantee he'd finish. And here's a truth that will hit you hard. That's all any of us are doing. Every act of love, every bold move, every risk, every confession is a sentence we start without knowing if we'll ever write the period, and yet write anyway. In his final days, he didn't rant or spiral into self-pity. He read poetry, he held his daughter, he stared out at the magnolias blooming and didn't complain that spring would go on without him. He simply documented what it felt like to leave in the middle of the story. You know why this book stings? Because it isn't about death. It's about what's left behind, and not just people, but potential, meaning, connection, the hard questions you kept deferring. This isn't a Hallmark goodbye. It's a warning shot. It's a map. It's a dare. Because Paul didn't just die bravely. He lived bravely. He wrote like his soul depended on it, because it did. And now it's your turn. Stop being passive. Stop thinking you'll have more time. This is it. You get this breath, maybe one more, maybe 1,000, but not forever. So write the damn letter, start the book, make the phone call, look someone in the eye and say the thing that's been stuck in your throat for years. Because Paul proved something no TED Talk ever could. You don't need time, you need clarity. You don't need a guarantee, you need urgency. And you sure as hell don't need to be perfect, you just need to mean it. Key takeaway. Life doesn't wait for you to get your act together. Death doesn't pause for you to figure things out. You get now, you get right now. Use it to build something that will speak long after you can't. Favorite quote, words have a longevity, I do not. Love signs the final page. You think you've had a bad day? Try watching the love of your life whisper, I'm ready, while hooked up to a machine that's doing the breathing for him. Try standing at the threshold between is and was and deciding to take off the mask, not because you want to, but because love demands it. Lucy Kalanithi didn't just watch Paul die, she helped him do it well. That's not metaphor, that's not romanticized grief, that's real-ass love at the edge of a cliff. Paul's final hours weren't Hollywood. There was no climactic orchestral swell, no dramatic final words that echo into the afterlife. What he said was simple. I'm ready. And with that, the doctor turned patient finally let go, not of life, but of the illusion that he could hold on to it forever. Here's what people don't want to admit. Most of us aren't afraid of dying. We're afraid of not mattering. And Paul? He made damn sure he mattered, not by being loud, not by chasing attention, but by showing up as a writer, as a father, as a husband, and yes, even as a dying man, especially as a dying man. In the room were monitors, beeping slowly, a daughter crawling, completely unaware her father was letting go, a wife trying to whisper comfort into the space where panic usually lives, a family watching someone leave, but not before teaching everyone else how it should be done. Lucy tells us that Paul wanted to hold their baby instead of fight for one more ventilator-assisted day. Let that punch you in the soul. He didn't want to fight cancer with slogans and fundraising runs. He wanted to leave gracefully. He chose to die the same way he chose to live, with clarity. And don't for 1 second call it a tragedy, because tragedy implies helplessness, and there's nothing helpless about the way Paul died. What happened to him was unfair, yes, but he faced it with more honesty than most of us bring to our Netflix queues. The book ends unfinished, but that's not a flaw. That's the damn point. Life ends unfinished. It always does, but what matters is what gets started. Paul started a conversation with death that most people avoid until it's too late. And through Lucy's narration, we don't just hear how he died. We feel how he chose it. He wasn't just slipping away. He was signing off. In her raw reflection, Lucy shows us that grief isn't the opposite of love. It's just its evolution. Her mourning isn't empty. It's full of meaning, memory, and even gratitude. And no, that doesn't make the pain any less crushing, but it makes it worth carrying. And here's your slap to the face. If you're waiting until the right time to say what matters, to do what matters, you're already late, Paul wrote with dying fingers. Lucy loved with breaking strength. You're still alive. You have no excuse. This isn't a sad story. It's a sacred one. Not because Paul was perfect, but because he was honest enough to show us what perfect effort looks like when perfection is off the table. And Lucy? She turned widowhood into testimony. She didn't just carry his words forward, she carried his life. This last breath is not an end, it's a legacy. Key takeaway: you don't get to choose how long you have, but you damn sure choose how you use what you're given. And when the clock runs out, make sure what you leave behind doesn't need you to be present to speak loud. Favorite quote: "You're a brave paladin. Thank you for loving me." Conclusion: you just walked through a man's life, his rise, his collapse, his resurrection through purpose, and finally, his death. And if all you're feeling right now is sadness, you missed the whole point. This wasn't a book about dying, it was a blueprint for living. Because Paul Kalanithi did what most of us are too damn scared to do. He asked the hard questions before life forced him to. He didn't wait until it was convenient. He didn't let fear slow him down. He didn't drown in distraction. He chased meaning while his body decayed. He became more human as he got closer to death, and he refused to die with anything left unsaid. That's the lesson. Most people will die full of potential they never used, full of apologies they never made, full of truths they never told. But not Paul. He emptied the tank completely. So now the mirror's pointed at you. What excuse are you clinging to? What project, dream, letter, relationship, or decision are you delaying because you think you've got time? You don't. If you're waiting for the perfect moment, it's this one. If you're waiting for permission, here it is. Stop pretending you're immortal. Start building a life that outlives you. And if this story meant something to you, don't just let it fade into another tab you closed. Let it wreck your comfort zone. Let it haunt your complacency. Let it burn away your excuses. And for God's sake, buy the damn book. Don't just sponge off summaries and motivational edits. Support what matters. Sit with Paul's actual words. Cry if you have to. Bleed if you need to. But don't walk away from this unchanged. Read it, reread it, pass it on. Because what Paul left behind isn't a memoir, it's a message. And it wasn't just meant to be read, it was meant to be lived. Now, if this video hit you in the gut, do something about it. Hit that like button if you're finally ready to stop sleepwalking through life. Subscribe if you're done chasing average, and share this with someone who's waiting for someday, because that lie has killed more dreams than death ever will. This isn't content. This is a call to arms. Your breath is still air. Use it. See you in the next one. Maybe. If you're still alive, you've got work to do.